Let's finish this cup of coffee. Probably a good idea for me to minimize this distracting window here. Close that. Get out of here. Why aren't you working? Command W. All right, fine. I'll just close you with a mouse click. And I suppose I can leave this guy open. My computer's being a little wonky. I don't like it, people, now, when stuff's not responsive. And suddenly my keyboard. I wonder if my keyboard's even. Oh no, it's working. It's very mysterious. Anyhow, morning. Good morning. It's Friday morning. It's 1 week before Christmas. Holy frig, I should do some Christmas shopping. No, I don't. I've got extra time because we are on quarantine throughout these holidays. So Bay and I are not going to be spending Christmas with our families, which is a bit sad. We'll, of course, do a Zoom. Bay has gone out of her way to create, hey, Heather. Well, that's unacceptable, Heather. You're going to have to sort that out. Uh, Bay's gone out of her way to create some fun Christmas, hey Anna, dinner for us, even though we're not going to get to spend it with our families. So we've got some Cornish hens, these little mini chickens that we're going to cook up, and we'll do a bunch of cooking and probably have presents for each other. And then the benefit to all this is we can do our shopping after the rush. So probably after a lot of stuff's on sale. We'll see. I also have a bunch of people who have asked for me to send them copies of the Spectrums of Being, and which is cool. It's neat that people want to. Hey, Padmas, how do I say your name? Padmasri? Padmasri? It sounds like Padmasri, but let me know. Give me the pronunciation. Um, so I went to the post office the other day, and with like my stack of books, they know me now. They're like, "Oh, you've got more books to send out." And I'm like, "Yeah." Actually, kind of neat. The last time I went to the post office, someone looked over. Hey, Lindsay. Looked over and was like, "Oh, the Spectrums of Being. What's that?" And I was saying, "Oh, it's I'm a coach. This is a model for how people show up in their lives, why we ended up being the way we were." And the woman got really curious, and she was like, "Oh, is that on sale somewhere?" I'm like, "No, but give me your address and I'll send it to you." So I got to send her a copy too. Anyhow, the point of this story is I went to the post office the other day, and the line of people, normally it's just me. I go in there, mail them, done. The line wrapped around the strip mall that this post office was in. So it went all the way to the one corner and then all the way to the other, people waiting to send stuff. And I decided at that point, well, people are going to be waiting a little longer for these books. They're not going to be coming for Christmas. So that's the world we currently live in. So anyhow, let's finish this last little bit of coffee with a bit of Carolyn's in it. Well, Carolyn's Irish cream. As a good husband, I got this delicious maple cream liqueur, which, as you can imagine, I don't know if you like the taste of maple. Generally, I don't love it. Like, I find it a bit cloying flavor-wise, but in my coffee, maple cream is delicious. And I bought some of that, and we've been putting that in our coffee in the morning. Not a lot, just a little bit. Hey, LA, long time no see. Good to see you with us. Um, but Babe really loves maple. So like a very good husband, I bought an alternate Irish cream, which I've been drinking so that she gets more of the good stuff. That's, I think, Hedwig from Harry Potter. All the mugs in this house are selected by my lovely wife, and most of them are Disney themed, with the exception of this rad mug right here that I'm going to be drinking tea out of that Bay also bought. This must have been before Disney became the theme of our house. It's got a mighty tiger on it, and it's sponsored by Starbucks, who I don't really care for their coffee. Anyhow, let's talk about good stuff. Where'd the topics go? They're right here in front of me. I know, sweet mug, right, Vera? And hello, good morning or evening or whatever time it is where you are. I like that. You guys gave me such great topics. I'm so delighted when I ask for topics and you guys share generously, truly an act of generosity. You put something out there for me to speak to. I know I say this every time, and every time I'm touched by my gratitude for people being willing to put something into the space to allow it to be a conversation. 9 p.m. Wow. So you're You are far. You're 11 hours. You're in Russia, right, Vera? I think that's right. I mean, I know you translate Russian beautifully. Would that, would 11 hours, that would put us into, that's got to be like the west part of Russia though, right? I'd, a friend of mine that I did learning how to lead men's work with, he was also doing a PhD in, I think he was in like ecology. So he was studying soil and he was in Russia a lot and he was sharing with me, I'm going to get this number wrong, but he said, we were just talking about what a unique country it is. And he was saying, yeah, it spans, and I think the number was 14 time zones. And if not 14, then it was 11. But either way, that like blows the mind when you think about like just how far a stretch of land one country equals in. Like 14 time zones. Oh my God. That means that I could be in one part of the country. And if I wanted to talk to the other part of the country, they're at the exact opposite side of the timeline. That blows my mind. So anyhow, welcome from Russia. Hey, Josh. So thank you everyone for these awesome topics. It's so much more interesting to me and hopefully to you when we're talking about stuff that we're bringing. So I'm going to start with a logistical one that Sherry brought, which was like, what's the equipment I use? I'm just going to show that really quickly, and then I'm going to get into the more what we'd call ontological stuff. Lighting for me, hey, Emmanuel, excited to have you here. Lighting for me has been an ongoing quest. I think I've got it dialed in. This feels really good, but the journey initially, I was just in front of a window with some curtains on it at our old condo, and that wasn't too bad. It wasn't great, but like what happened here, I'll show you, was that I ended up with, I think I can do this here. This is how it looked. So the background was quite, as my friend put it, dull and drab. And so basically, I was overlit and the background was underlit. And so then I bought these guys. My assistant did some research and bought me these sort of LED lights, which I can't turn on because it's unplugged. But this is what I was using for a long time. I had them in front of my monitor. And what I was trying to do was, I don't know really what my plan was. I didn't have any experience this, but the sun was shining through my window. I had no curtain. And then I was trying to like sort of light myself up to equate with the background, which was getting blasted by the sun. So I worked with that for a while. That was never very satisfying. And what I have done recently, at least as far as lighting is concerned, is I've bought these products by Philips. The brand of lights are called Hue, and they're what they are is smart lights, so you can control them from your phone. You can set them up with timing and all that, and they have a massive. They can hit every color you could possibly want. So we can make this whole room pink or whatever. So I have two lights like this, which are kind of ugly to look at, but they sit behind my monitor and shine on the wall right in front of me, which is a white wall. So right now they're blasting white light at the wall, which then reflects onto me. And then I've got a curtain in front of this window, which made a huge difference. If I just lift this curtain up, you can see the lighting gets a lot harsher. And when the sun's out, I'm just blasted. So we've got basically a diffuser there. And so as far as lighting is concerned, that's mostly what I do now. I've got the overheads sort of balance out the room. We've got lights behind the monitor that balances me out, and then diffuser in front of the window in the form of a curtain, which sort of makes it less harsh on me. The first sip of the tea. Next, so this is a question Sherry asked. What do I use for equipment? Like if you use a light or a microphone, what do you use? So that's the lighting. Heavenly glow. Thank you, Andrew. And these are funny things actually. Like it's worth mentioning here. Content is king, I believe. So I think what is most compelling. This is my belief about the lives I do is I've done a lot of work to be fully expressed, and I continue to do so. And so on these lives, you get what you're getting is my being, right? You're getting all of who I am, including the parts I don't want to share with you because I've done work to allow those to be shared, to move myself through my own edges to the extent I have and share them into the space. And then from there, we can explore concepts and ideas without needing to know an answer because it's just like, oh, this being fully expressed is exploring this idea. And that's always compelling in my belief. And having said that, there was this interesting incongruity that I was creating, which was who I was being and what I was speaking on was like the function of having done a lot of work. So the way I was showing up, the things I would speak to, the authenticity I would bring, the expression I would bring. Oh, there's a what we might call like a really shiny way of being that Adam's bringing into the space. But that was contrasted with lighting that was kind of off and weird and dull. And so this creates this weird incongruence for people where they're like, wow, what he's saying and who he's being is so fully expressed. And yet the lighting in his room, there's something about it that conveys a different thing to us. And for the most part, it's not a big thing. We're not gonna make a big deal of it. We're not gonna really worry about it. But those incongruities pull at us. This is like when someone has branding that feels off, where their brand is one thing, but then the way, like someone, maybe you've had this experience where you meet someone at a networking event and they tell you they help people become the masters of their wealth, and they're wearing a wrinkly suit, and you're like, the way you are showing up does not convey the being of being a master of your wealth to me. It conveys sloppiness. It conveys do the minimum or whatever. It's telling me a different story than the brand that you're telling me. And so even though these things seem small, they add up and they convey so much more than we realize. So even though it's like, what the fuck, why is Adam talking about his lighting? I think this is important. It's taken me a long time to take this on. And I think it's a great example of just how there's always edges. There's always new places to see like, oh, where might I be out of alignment? And that lack of alignment, that disalignment is creating a different experience than the one I'm committed to conveying to people. The next thing, Sherry says, what do I use for a mic? So I use Plantronics. It fits in this little case here. Plantronics Voyager 5200, I think, which is just this headset here. I use that for my lives because for my lives, I'm not giving you the best quality of sound. I'm giving you good enough sound. It's good enough in as much as I think that the sound's pretty clear. You are getting video as well as audio, whereas with a podcast, you're only getting audio. So the sound is that much more important. And it cancels noise. It does a whole bunch of stuff, and it's all fine and good. For my podcast, I'll just show you here. It's sort of hanging here. Just going to knock a cane down, but let's bring it into. I got to move it into screen. Get over there. So this is the mic I use for my podcast, which is it's got a pop filter and I don't know what the brand. It's an AKG P220. I'll just leave that there for now, which is a fairly expensive mic. I think it was about $400, and then you have to get a what's called a preamp. You can't plug that into your computer. You have to plug it into a preamp, and then the preamp plugs into your computer, and you have to fiddle with knobs, which I had someone help me with. And it's a huge fucking pain in the ass. The worst part about doing my podcast is I have to lug that thing along with the equipment I keep in my closet over there into our bedroom's closet, because that's the best place to record in, because the bedroom's closet has clothes hanging down. So it's a lot of soft surfaces. So the sound doesn't bounce around and create a bunch of echo and feedback. So for the podcast, I use that mic and I record in my closet because I want to remove as much as possible from the signal. Put differently, I want to take everything out of the way that might get in the way of people hearing the message. So we would call this like being responsible for the listening. If I record a podcast and the sound's kind of off and I'm banging around and you hear me scratching at my desk or clinking things together, you hear a bunch of distracting stuff. Now you have to work harder to hear what I'm saying. You have to, even if it's not conscious, you have to actively filter out these sounds. And anytime you're kind of distracted by a sound in my background, you have to actively choose back into the conversation I'm bringing. So we're always working, and I think good equipment is important for this reason, to move stuff out of the way of the listening. The job of coach and leader is to keep doing the work over here so we can remove as much of our stuff from the listening. That way we can be as shiny a mirror as possible for the person that we're working with. So this is the headset I use for all my coaching calls, anytime I'm working with someone or working with groups. And the reason for that is because, um, yes, it does, Emmanuel, and it's also really annoying. I bought panels and I have a room that I want to treat to make a studio. I don't want to do it in here because I've got all this cool shit that I love being surrounded with, but I've got another room that I want to put up panels so I can have that stuff set up. A lot of people record or do coaching with this sound piece right here, or with the AirPods, the whatever, the wireless ones. And you don't know how much that mic sends through to the other side because you're not on the other side listening. So when people start coaching, they wear those headphones. They think no big deal. I did the same thing. And then I had to record calls because I was certifying and getting accredited, and I was listening to my own calls, and I was like, geez, these are like, it's obnoxious. I can hear every sound. All the sound gets put through. And one of the people that trained me once said, Adam, you have only two tools as a coach. You have your speaking and you have your listening. So you need to get as much out of the way as possible. Don't eat when you're speaking. This goes for leaders too. Don't eat and then speak something into the space. Have your mouth be clear. Have your instrument be free. The way he described this was it would be like if you were playing a trombone, but then you were sticking your hands in the instrument as you were playing it. Like, don't do that. It gets in the way of what you're conveying. So leave your instruments clear. And so that's why I use this headset, because it filters all the sound out. I can go for a walk. Thanks, Katya. I can go for a walk outside and the sound of cars and stuff gets filtered out so that I can still speak cleanly into the space for someone, and they don't have to do any of that. Like, they don't have to fix or filter out noise and stuff like that. Okay, let me just see if there's anything more before I move off of this. It's a little more logistical. I'm going to get into more ontological stuff shortly. So LA, the headset I use is called the Voyager Plantronics. The Plantronics, let me write it in here. We'll put it in. Headset is Voyager Plantronics. I think it's 5200. Hold on, I've got a whole bunch here that I send to people. Whenever I start working with a coach, this is one of the first gifts they get. So I have a bunch of these. So it's this one, the Voyager 5200 UC Plantronics. Because they've hired me, they're going pro. We're going to have them go pro. No more shoddy sound. And it's amazing. You'd be amazed at these little things where it's like, whatever, it's just sound. I can get away with it. The little things, the devil is in the details. And when we take on those little things, piece by piece, we just move ourselves forward more and more and more. Yeah, I love that, Andrew. And that was the same for me. I'd have people say like, man, your content's great, but like the lighting is just distracting. And now when I see people doing lives, I notice it. I didn't notice it before. Anna, that is unacceptable. I absolutely sent you one. Let us look into that. I'm so sorry that you haven't gotten one and that this is the way you're finding out that you should have gotten a gift that you didn't. I thought for sure anyhow. So it's interesting. Just if you note, you'll notice the difference, and there's something about it where we're like, there's less I have to listen through. And sometimes I'll get on the phone with someone. I was talking to someone the other day. We'd set up a call to connect, and he must have had me on his speakerphone in his car. And it's not my job in this moment is not to point this out to him, and it's not his job to do anything about it. We're just two human beings connecting. But I'll tell you, it was fucking annoying. I had to like listen really hard to him. I'm just going to make a reminder, Anna, so that I don't forget. I had to listen to him really hard, and I had to like, I had to keep really focusing. I had to turn the volume way up, which meant I heard all of his background noise louder, and it was annoying. And I'm reliable over here to work through that, but not everyone is. And so again, right, these small things add up. They get in the way. Light, microphone, talked about that. Do I use my phone or my computer? And is there a management system I use for sending and receiving client stuff, communication, and payments? It is super annoying, Katja. Yeah, sound is so important. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for getting that and sharing the enthusiasm. The management system I use, so I have everything kept in Evernote, which is kind of a a digital file folder, if you like, and all my clients have their own sort of uh, what would you call it, notebook, and then everything they send me goes in there. I use a calendar to manage my management system's fairly it's fairly simple. I don't like a lot of overhead because if there's a lot of overhead, I stop using something. Like if I have to do a bunch of stuff to organize something, I'm not going to do it. So I work to keep it as simple as possible. So I have my email. When people make requests of me over any system, any messaging system other than email, I ask them to send me an email with that request. And the reason is that I am very committed to not being reliable to track messages anywhere other than email. I am 100% committed to tracking emails. If you send me an email, you will get a response. I'm committed to that. But I am not interested in making that commitment in any other place because it's exhausting and most other places don't have a very reliable inbox. Like if you send me a text message, I get sent text messages throughout the day and they filter down. And once I've read it, it's no longer shows as unread. And I don't have this sort of inbox that allows me to manage it the same way. And so sometimes people find this annoying. They're like, but I already asked you here. Why can't you just do it? And the reason is it's a little like when someone is planning a wedding and they are like, are you coming to my wedding? I sent you an RSVP. And you're like, yeah, I totally am. Yeah, mark me down. And you're like, no, fucking send me the RSVP. I am managing so much stuff. I need you to send that so that I can track it in my system. So that's really the main thing that I do is I be really responsible for what I'm committed to and what I'm not committed to. And I own that. And I let people know, hey, I'm happy to honor your request, but the best way to ensure I do it is email me this. So for scheduling, email me. I'm totally unreliable. I'm gleefully unreliable to take it on and to track any of this stuff via Messenger. So those are the main systems I use. I don't use like a CRM, whatever those are called, client retention or something management. I don't know, whatever it's called. I don't use that stuff. I tried for a while. I had Salesforce and I was working with it, but for the most part, I I put an appointment in my calendar. I set a reminder. I use reminders a lot on my phone, and the reason I do that is there's so little overhead. I can say, remind me to check in with Roger tomorrow morning. Oh, Siri didn't do it right that time. Let's try it one more time. Remind me to check in with Roger tomorrow morning. So I just punch in Siri, and then she says that she sets up a reminder for me. Check in with Roger tomorrow, 7 a.m. Client relations management. Thank you, Heather. So then now I got to complete this because otherwise I'm going to be like, who the fuck's Roger? Bam, gone. But tomorrow morning at 7 a.m., I would get a message on my phone saying, check in with Roger. So yes, you are, Emmanuel. So that allows that is very low overhead, which is what I'm aiming for anything like that. Because if I'm out, I don't want to have to fiddle through something and type up and what's the tag that I meant to put on this to, oh, that's not helpful for me. I want to just be able to say, hey, remind me to do this. Boom, done with it. And so I find iPhone's reminders app and Siri's integration with it is the best thing that I can use. Okay, well, that's enough. I don't want to keep talking about systems because they're a little dull for me to talk about. Let's. So Vera asked about dealing with too many choices. I'm going to read what she wrote because I think it's really good. So Vera says, I'm struggling with structuring and timing in creative work, such as writing posts, creating videos and podcasts, illustration. How do I process the bundle of ideas and inspirations and package them into some digestible form? Too many options of how I can do that are killing me. So yeah, Heather, it's super. Once you start using it, you're like, oh my God, it's so easy. Much easier to put stuff into my system now. So how do we have, as humans, we are a font of, by Heather, a font of ideas, a wellspring of ideas. And the first thing that I'll say that I want to speak to is we have a relationship to our ability to generate ideas that is often one of scarcity. So what that means is when we have an idea that's a good idea, we're like, fuck, I have to capture that idea. Used to be what I would do. I would use voice memos and I would catch every idea. I'd be out walking and be like, oh, idea, blah, blah, blah. And then I had a system every Saturday. I would sit down and I'd go through every voice memo and then I'd convert it and put it into Evernote. So I had this page of ideas, and I go through that. I don't do that anymore. And part of the reason for that is because I've learned to trust that there's always another idea. And even though that idea might have been really good and might have been inspiring, there'll be a new idea. And I've learned to trust that if I'm willing to sit down and do the work, regardless of how I feel about it, the muse will show up to some extent. What that means is I've I've learned to be at cause to create something rather than at the effect of whether or not I feel inspired in the moment. So I'm laying some foundation here to be clear. This is not yet getting to Vera's question. But instead, what most of us have is, again, that relationship to scarcity about the good idea. Fuck, that's the good idea. I need to capture the good idea. That's the one that inspires me. And if I lose that, then I'm not going to be inspired and I won't create anything. And we make that true because we wait for inspiration before we create. We don't say every day at 9 a.m. I am writing for an hour. We write when we feel inspired because that feels more flow statey. Seth Godin talks about flow state being a toxic idea, a trap, this thing that you have to wait for before you commit to doing your actions, to taking on the work. And in fact, you get to a flow state because you're willing to start not that way. So that's one thing we do from scarcity is like, we clutch at our ideas, they become precious and sacred, and we have to keep them, and we get very fixated on tracking all of them, which is exhausting to me. The other thing we do is we try to do all of them. We're like, I've got this idea for this, and I've got that idea for that, and I've got this idea for that, and I've got a great idea for an illustration and for a this and a that, and I've got to do them all right now, or they'll disappear, or I'll run out of time, or I won't create the expression that is mine to be created. Oh no. And so what that leads to is we end up, whoops, I just spilled tea everywhere on my desk. Brief intermission while I clean up this wad of tea. I have cloths on my desk precisely for this reason, because I'm also gleefully reliable to spill tea everywhere on my desk during these Friday shows. This intermission brought to you by Spilt Tea. Just put this one here. There we go. This is almost as good as new, / sopping wet. Just clean that up. Okay. All right. I'm going with the flow. I'm in a flow state. Okay. So what happens is we kind of we end up trying to choose everything. We try to choose all of the things. In my first year as a coach, I wrote a post about this because I had distinguished for myself that that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to be a high-level tournament squash player. I was trying to be a software project manager. I was trying to be a time management coach. I didn't even know what coaching was at this point, but I had glommed onto that idea. I was trying to be the very best at a video game called Virtua Fighter. I was also trying to write strategy articles and develop an audience for that game. I was writing strategy articles about squash. I was trying to be like the best husband, and I was trying to do so much. And as you can imagine, what that creates is this, I was very diffuse. And what I could distinguish for myself, this isn't about anyone else, but for myself, I was doing that as a way of hedging my bets against failing. Because if I didn't succeed over here, at least over there, I had like, okay, maybe I don't win at that squash tournament, but then I've got all these other 6 things that I'm trying really hard to do. So that way I'm safe. I'm not a failure. So part of what this provides us is safety from the crushing feeling of disappointment or failure or not succeeding or whatever it is. So it's actually a hedge for me. By doing a million different things, I'm hedged, I'm protected. And I don't have to have this fear of like, basically a fear of falling behind. What would that be? FOFBA. FOFBA, classic FOFBA, hashtag, we'll put it in the comment. FOFBA, FOFB, would you like a FOFB? The fear of falling behind. Fuck, if I only focus here, I'm going to fall behind in all these other areas. I have to do everything. And so by doing everything, I ensured I never fell behind, in theory. Of course, as you can imagine, that's not at all what happened. What happened is I moved forward very, very in slow builds, and it was a lot of work, and it was tiresome and exhausting, and things didn't tend to increase and improve the way that I hoped that they would. Thanks, Michelle. I love you too. Um, so all of this was designed to protect me from that fear. It was all a reaction to my underlying fear. And so what I've learned to do is, and what I often find starts to set people free, is to choose a thing to really take on. Choose a one thing. So if you were to look at my life these days, you'd see like, wow, Adam's up to a ton. He does these lives, he does podcasts, he writes blogs, he creates infographics. But if I started trying to create that, it would have all fallen, nothing would have happened. The way all this came, Emmanuel, the way all this came into being was because I started with one thing. And the one thing I started with initially was writing. So early days, I made a commitment to myself. I'm going to write, I think at the time it was, I'm going to write a blog post once a week. When I first started coaching, I was like, I'd already been blogging for a while at this point, but it was the first time I made a commitment to consistency. The commitment was every Friday, I will write a blog post. And so I did. Every Friday, I wrote a blog post. And it's interesting actually to look back at that because that really required something from me. Like it was hard to stay that course because there was Fridays when I didn't know what I wanted to write and I didn't feel inspired and I hadn't created, I hadn't gotten much ground underneath me. So I hadn't yet learned to trust this process. And instead, what I was more present to was like sitting in the airport, coming back from Seattle where I'd been training coaches and feeling completely drained and not wanting to write and wanting to play video games, and yet instead choosing to write. And so what happened though, as I did that, was I started to develop a practice of showing up regardless of how I felt, and a practice where writing became automatic. It became just something, another part of my day, like waking up and brushing my teeth. I don't know about you, but there's days when I don't want to brush my teeth. I still brush them. There's also days when I don't want to shower, and sometimes I don't shower on those days, but my teeth always get brushed. And for the most part, so that my body still gets scrubbed and showered. So those are both, for the most part, automatics. And these days, so too is writing. But initially it wasn't because I had to learn to create that consistency. And in creating that consistency, I had to let other things fall by the wayside. I had to make something a priority. And if you make anything a priority, it means it's going to conflict and win out over whatever isn't the priority. Trying to make everything your priority is a recipe for failure and exhaustion, absolute exhaustion and burnout. Choosing one thing is opens the gate to start to create some automaticity in the good way, like some consistency of practice. And so I got writing, and then that became the automatic for me. And then the next thing was lives. I did work with a branding person. They were like, I think you would really be great live in front of the camera, and I think you should do that. And so I made my commitment that every Friday at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, I was going to be doing a live. And, it's been, I don't know, 5 years now, maybe 4 years that I call this a show now. This show has been running every Friday for the most part at 10 a.m. I would be at trainings or events that I'd signed up for in LA or somewhere like that, and I would leave the room and I would go find a bench somewhere on a beach and I would go live for an hour because that's what I was committed to. So I think for often, who knows, right? There's never an answer, but I often find that the work for us is the trust required to choose a thing. And as humans, we tend not to like to choose. We prefer golly. Here's to spilling our tea, Emmanuel. This is how we do it. Cup was too small. It's your fault, cup. It's not my fault. Or the tea was too big, maybe. But anyhow, the trust in choosing something. And as humans, we resist this. And instead, what we do is we choose nothing or we choose everything, which are actually the exact same thing. Oh, I'm choosing all of these things. Yeah, that's the same as not choosing anything. And we do that because we're afraid of falling behind. We're afraid of missing out. We're afraid of, in some regard, failing at the thing we chose, and then we're going to find out we made the wrong choice. And it's all about managing this fear that we're going to do it wrong. We're going to fail, that we make the wrong choice. In reality, there is no wrong choice. All there is a choice. And in fact, what really dictates where things go from there is not the choice we make, it's who we be after we've made the choice. So what a lot of us do is once we are like, oh, got it, Adam, or someone said choice, okay, I'm going to choose, we make the choice, but then we disempower the choice ongoingly. So we're like, we choose this one thing, and then we keep looking over there at the stuff we haven't chosen and be like, oh, fuck, look what's happened. It's all falling. I've got FOFB again. Instead of being like, no, I chose this. I am going to find out how can I empower this choice? Because currently I'm disempowering it. What do I need to get back here? So that's really what I see often, not always, because there's always nuance to all of this. But when we're struggling with a wealth, the abundance of ideas, what truly tends to set us free is choosing something and making some kind of commitment towards it. Thanks for that question, Vera. It's awesome question. I really appreciate you bringing that. And frankly, Vera, I appreciate your presence in my feed. I love your energy. I love your wit and your playfulness and your brilliance. And I really it delights me that from me going to this event in Cancun, there's like this relationship you and I get to have via Facebook that I just get to see these parts of you show up. So thanks for being a part of my world. Okay, let's talk about Andrew's question, which is about the comfort of our homeostasis. So I'm going to elaborate on that. Thanks, Farah. Andrew says, how do you create the next stage of your evolution as a being? I ask because I've hit a point where my daily routines are fairly consistent, my mindset's relatively strong, and I'm creating some really cool things in my life. Sweet, way to go. Brag, hashtag brag. In some moments, however, I'll wonder why I'm only inching forward outside of my bubble instead of doing something bigger, such as training for a triathlon, learning a brand new skill. I tend to just stay in my lane. So let me see. Where do we start with this one? The first thing I think we start with is by saying there's nothing wrong with staying in our lane. There's nothing wrong, like you may be someone who's gotten your life nice and good, nice and good. And having a nice and good life is awesome. That's great. That's something to celebrate. People often ask the question like, well, why do I need a coach? Why should I have a coach? And the obvious answer there is you shouldn't, and you don't. You don't need one. And if life is awesome for you, great. That's hang out in awesome. There's absolutely no reason to hire someone because you're not like, it's almost like life's pretty good and there's something wrong with that is a little bit sort of like the essence of this question in a way, like life's pretty good and yet what should I do about that? So I'm not saying there's not more to this. I'm just saying as a starting point, it's totally fine to just hang out in life being pretty fine and good. Now, having said that, our tendency as humans is to create safety, to create what we call homeostasis. So homeostasis is sort of this state where, well, let's think of it this way. Imagine that here's where you currently are, and here's the next level. And you're like, hey, I want to get to the next level. And the next level involves a raise at my job, it involves a partner that loves me, and it involves $50,000 in the bank. Just make these things up. And to do that is possibly going to require some breakthroughs. And so we will do what we have to, given enough commitment and a willingness to make stuff happen and maybe some support, we create those breakthroughs. And we're like, wow, this is amazing. I've got my partner, I've got my job, I've got $50,000 in the bank. Life feels pretty good. This happens kind of by default when you're growing up. Because when you're growing up, you don't have a lot of freedom. You haven't had to go into the world and find your way. You're initially just under the care of your parents and your guardians. I'm just folding up my tea-drenched cloths. That's what I'm looking down for, because I like things to be orderly and neat. Because some people would say I have obsessive compulsive disorder. I just like things to be in nice little squares. Otherwise, I know my family will die. If that's obsessive compulsive, anyhow. Okay. So where was I? Right. When we're growing up, we don't have much choice but to do this stuff. It's sort of like, well, you're 18. You can either stay at home in the comfort of the womb, so to speak, or you can go out and find your way in the world. And I think it's pretty natural as humans. We can get trained out of this, but our natural state is to go out into the world and forge a path. And so, in doing so, we're inevitably going to get confronted and we're going to have to create some kind of breakthrough somehow. Children are amazing at creating breakthroughs because they have so much less invested in maintaining the status quo. They have less fear, they have less stories about what it means to not succeed or do things the right way, and they have less stakes against failing. Like once you're a millionaire, you have a lot of stakes about maintaining yourself as a millionaire. You're a lot more afraid to take a risk with your money. Whereas if you have $10, the stakes are just lower, right? You have less to lose. So for all of these reasons and a whole bunch more, we're much more apt and inclined to lean out over the edge when we're younger. And the older we get, the more we know, the more that our world has solidified into the shape that it's solidified in, which therefore confirms our beliefs, and the more we feel inclined to protect what we have. And so what tends to happen is as we age, what we do is less forging into the vast unknown and more polishing the nest, so to speak. So what we tend to get into is really like noticing like, oh, there's an edge over there, there's a piece of dirt on the wall, I'm going to clean that off. Whereas when we're younger, we might be like, this house sucks, I want a bigger house. I'm going to go and create the bigger house, even though it means that I will have to leave this existing house behind. So hopefully you can see just that kind of distinction and get, perhaps on trust, if nothing else, that there is there's a natural tendency as we age to put more and more attention on maintaining what we have. So the question Andrew is speaking to here is kind of like, it's a reflection of that homeostasis. It's a reflection of that place we get to where we're like, life's pretty good. I've managed to take out most of the things that were upsetting me. I've managed to like get the job, get the partner, get the money. Life's not too bad. And then we end up kind of bored. And what happens inside of this kind of situation is we go looking for things to cure boredom. So we might pick up bad habits, substance abuse, affairs, anything that kind of gives us a sense of the excitement we remembered when we were young. We also might double down. We might find ways to sort of tell ourselves, like, I should stop wanting for things. I just need to learn how to be happy with what I have. That's a common refrain when someone is feeling the unhappiness from being stuck inside the world they've created. Is, oh, I just need to learn how to be happier with what I already have. There's times when that's the case. For some people, where their default is to find problems and to despair, yeah, maybe the work is to be happier. But for a lot of people, that refrain about, oh, I just need to learn how to be happier is really a function of the fact that they've built a beautiful prison for themselves. And now that they're in it, they're kind of bored. Life doesn't feel as colorful as it once did. And so this is the place where the risk is that people try to push out of that bubble because they feel they should, which is never going to be a very compelling reason to move yourself towards something greater. Trying to take on your fear because you should, fear will crush that every time. The way trying to defeat your fear, trying to tackle your fear from should works, is that you'll get fired up. I should lose weight, for example, or I should take more risks. Why? Because I should. I want to live a more adventurous life. Okay, but it's still kind of that whole goal is really a function of like what's wrong or what you feel is wrong with your current life. So it's still kind of a should. And so trying to tackle fear from that, you're going to be like, I'm fired up. I'm going to take more risks. And you're going to go out there. And then once you actually confront your fear, fear will chop that down. Fear is very clear and present and real. It is not vague. It is not made up of, I should do something, or maybe it'd be neat if I was better. Fear is sharp and penetrating. And so there's a half-life in our ability to move things forward from what we should do differently. I've laid a lot of groundwork, and I think I'm just going to give a really simple answer to Andrew's question, because he says, how do you create the next stage of your evolution as a being? Well, what I would have you do, Andrew, is get clear, like, what's the result that you really want to create that's next? Like, not the incremental result, not like, oh, I'm making $10,000 a year, I'd like to make $12,000 a year. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just what you're saying is you're wondering why you're inching forward outside of your bubble instead of doing something different. The answer to that question is because it's safe. That's what most of us do. That's why most of us inch our bubble. We incrementally grow our bubble. The land of breakthroughs exists inside of saying something like, I'm making $10,000 a year right now, and I'm committed to making $20,000 a year, which is going to be sort of a terrifying thing to say to yourself, because it's like, that I don't know how could I possibly create that? That's not going to work. I don't know how to make that happen. And to create a result like that is going to require you getting supported, and it's going to require you failing. You're going to have to try new things, and inevitably, unless you get it right the very first time, you're going to fail and fall on your face. And so that's where breakthroughs occur. Breakthroughs occur when we take our fishing rod and we cast it way out into the ocean of possibility. We throw our lure way out there and then we commit to going and getting it. This is such a weird metaphor, but hang in there with me, guys. Even and especially when we have no idea how we're going to make it happen. We don't like doing this. We don't like doing it because it sets us up to fail. And the reason it sets us up to fail is because failure is a necessary ingredient to success. If you want to bake a success pie, failure is one of the ingredients. That's a good line. That would be a good TED talk right there. If you want to bake a success pie, failure is one of the ingredients. But because we don't like it, what we tend to do is one of two things. We avoid making any kind of commitment, any kind of declaration that would push us, that would call us into that vast unknown where we might have to confront failure. Or we do the other one where we make vague proclamations about impossible goals, but no commitment to them. The nature of an impossible goal is that someone does not commit to it, almost by definition. Right out of the gate, you've declared it's impossible. So you're not going to commit to that. That has people, that's like wishing on a penny, kissing it and throwing it into the ocean and be like, I wish for $1 million. Maybe you'll get it, but you're totally at the effect of the world around you. And it's not like you're actually sitting down and planning it out and doing anything. So instead, it becomes wish fulfillment rather than a life at cause, rather than a life that you've declared and fulfill on. And so to come all the way back full circle, the answer to your question, Andrew, of why, I wonder why I'm inching forward outside of my bubble, because it's safer and because it's scary to do the other thing. And the way we move beyond that, how do you create the next stage of our evolution as our being? You don't worry about the next stage of your evolution of your being. That is all in the background. What you put your attention on is, what tangible result am I committed to creating that seems totally outside of the realm of what's possible? Not something so big that it really is impossible. Like, I want complete peace on Earth and all the nuclear weapons to be gone within 7 weeks. Very neat aspiration, but that's not something you're really going to create. But a goal that you can't see how to create, but that it is physically possible for you to create it somehow. It could come into existence. And then once you've created that, that's why we work with coaches, to get supported with all the fear that comes up and to get supported to actually create something outside of what we already know how to do. That's how we do that. And that's why we don't do it. It's because it's safer not to. We don't want to have to touch that ingredient called failure. Okay. What do we have next? Just what do we have next here? The gear, I talked about that. Bragging versus owning your light, changing our context. I'm going to talk about changing our context. This is a David Medina question. So David says, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit because I was a little confused by the way you worded your question, David. That's okay, though. I think Spanish is David's first language. He has a beautiful accent. I'm very jelly. Can you speak on the things we put in the way of what we want, such as guilt, and how coaching can be about shifting the context or paradigm that creates so as to not have to feel that way, but also how coaching serves to fully embrace the thing? So how do we simultaneously learn to embrace something like guilt and at the same time not have guilt get in our way? And the part I want to talk about here is what actually happens in coaching, because the two there's two myths I assert are present in coaching alongside 50 billion other ones, but I'm going to talk about two of them right now. The first myth is you don't have to feel fear. You don't have to feel guilt ever. You don't have to feel whatever. And so this approach, I don't even know if it's mythological. I guess I would say I believe that that is toxic, that belief. And so the reason this particular belief is toxic is it has people delay taking action until there is a complete and total absence of fear. And your experience may be different from mine, but my experience is anytime I have no fear, it's because I've already conquered that domain. Anytime I'm doing anything that is outside of what I already know and have mastered, there's a degree of fear. And so the impact of buying into this belief that like with just enough conversation I can never feel fear, I find is that people specifically stay in conversation forever and never take the action that would actually move their lives forward. See you, Anna. Have a good night. So that's the first toxic belief. The other toxic belief is more along the lines, maybe it's more of a toxic approach of Jocko Willings and the likes kind of angle for this work. Jocko's been in my sites lately, I guess. I'm sure he's a fine guy. I know nothing about him other than his marketing. His marketing and the stuff I've heard from him on like podcasts and third hand, it sounds kind of like, Jocko, you get up at 4 a.m. and you do all this stuff. How do you do that? You just fucking do it. Just say you're going to do it and do it. So this is more of the camp of like, feel the fear and just fucking do it. And the trouble with that approach, what makes that toxic is what that leads to people doing is taking all the action without doing any distinguishing. So on the one side, all I'm doing is distinguishing and being in conversation and trying to create more and more and more awareness. On the other side, it's all entirely doing. And I'm not really creating any awareness. So then whatever is underneath, whatever the story that's playing out that has me show up and doing certain things, all the actions I'm going to take are going to necessarily be over top of this. Werner Erhard calls this like we have no access to this thing underneath. And if we have no access to it, then we're perpetually at the effect of it. It runs us rather than any other way. Oh, thank you, Emmanuel. I appreciate that. So that other direction, you'll end up in action, but it's kind of like the action is still going to be at the effect or under the control of the underlying thing that's in our way. So now I'm going to talk about what happens in coaching, what actually happens when coaching moves something forward. So let's work with guilt because that's what David brought us. So imagine that, let me just come up with an example here. What is something we might do out of, well, actually someone give me something. So what is something that you would do because underneath you feel guilty not doing it? So it's like, oh, I feel guilty, so I'm going to do this thing. I'm doing this because that way I don't have to feel guilty. I feel guilty if I stop doing it. Give me an example so I have something to work with. This is the part where I sit quietly while I wait for people to generate. Yeah, overschedule my kids. Great. Call my mom. Beautiful. Great examples. So we're going to start overscheduling myself. Great. So let's work with overscheduling ourselves. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate you sharing those. So we're going to start by saying nothing inherently is bad. Don't argue with me on this. Just try this on so that we can do the work we're here to do. So overscheduling ourselves, there's going to be times when that's a positive thing. We're like, hey, I'm really clear, I'm really committed to this. And even though I'm also committed to my well-being, temporarily I'm willing and empowered by my decision to overschedule, to schedule more of myself than feels good. And so what we might do from this, let's imagine we've got a coach or a salesperson who, or someone in a support role who they feel guilt when someone says, can I have some of their time? And they are a no inside. So what's happening is they know I don't want to give up more of my time. And yet they are. Yeah, Andrew, that's right. Put you on the spot. And yet they are. So internally, the state is, I don't want to give any more of my time. But what happens externally is, internally, I don't want to give up any more of my time, but I feel guilty not giving this person time. And then so what happens externally is, yes, I've got time for you. Let's schedule it in. And then if we followed that down the chain, probably lead to like some resentment when you actually get into conversation with this person and like you find a way to empower it. And maybe it's even like, oh, that was a great call. But on some level, you're left tired or exhausted or feeling burnt out or, any of these things that sort of happen. So let's look at the two toxic approaches. We'll look at Jocko. I'm calling it the Jocko approach, but this is not his. He's just sort of like a lightning rod for it because he's got a massive neck and has that military, like just fucking do it kind of energy. So down that approach, what happens is I feel guilty saying no to this person, but now there's a guy with a big neck shouting in my ear, just fucking do it. So what I'm going to do is just fucking no is the answer. So now you're saying no to people. Hooray! Except you've done nothing about the internal state of guilt. You've done nothing about the story underneath that has you feeling guilty. So what's going to start to happen if you continue down this path is you're going to get better and better at saying no, but simultaneous to that, you're also going to get basically more comfortable, or better put, more familiar with the feeling of guilt. So you're like, yeah, I say no to a lot of people and I feel fucking guilty all the time. So we've got on the one, do I have a big neck, Andrew? So on the one side, I don't think that's what you're referring to, but on the one side down this path, you can say yes so as to alleviate the feeling of guilt, or you can start saying no. Yeah, I'm saying no, fuck it. And then your two choices are either be with the overwhelming feeling of guilt and try to find a way to cope with that, or be with the overwhelming feeling of guilt and try to cope with it. And then what happens is people develop strategies to cope. So then the next level of this would be, oh my God, I feel so guilty. I'm just going to stop caring. So then we do what you could call kind of a degree of dissociation. We dissociate from how we're feeling so we don't have to feel it. We're still feeling it. We just remove ourselves so that we're not present with it. And this is what leads to experiences people report as depression or resignation in their lives, because they've now, in order to survive and keep just fucking doing it, they have to unplug from their heart, because what's happening in their heart is a bunch of guilt, and they don't want to keep living this life feeling guilt, so they unplug and then they just operate from their head up, which leads to an experience of life that's a flat line. We feel very resigned, depressed, nothing seems to fucking matter. Well, how can it? You're unplugged from your heart, your feelings. You're not willing to feel what you're feeling. So that's what happens down that just fucking do it, all doing, no distinguishing approach. The next other side of this, the other toxic approach, would be where I feel guilty saying no to people, but I want to say no. Oh, great, Andrew. Yeah, it's very fitting. Yeah, perfect timing. You're a bit of a prophet. Andrew was asking about this just recently. The other side of it is like, I feel guilty saying no, and I don't want to feel guilty. And I believe there's a possibility of not feeling guilty. So I'm going to stay in conversation until I don't feel guilty saying no, and then I'm going to start saying no. So maybe in a way, this is better. We could argue. I'm going to argue that they're actually both the same thing, but we'll come to that in a sec. So, okay, I am going to get into a conversation with a coach. I'm going to work with that coach, and we're going to look at it, and it's like, oh, my guilt means, like, the reason I feel guilty is because And then there's going to be some reason. Like growing up, my parents never had time for me. And I always felt so disappointed for that. There was never enough time for me. And I felt heartbroken. And I can't be with my own heartbreak. I have learned that that way of feeling is impossible to be with. It's horrible. And I never, rather than learn how to, see Andrew, rather than learn how to be with the heartbreak that is inherent at times in being a human, instead I'm going to find ways to ensure I never feel heartbroken and I never have to have anyone else feel heartbroken. And no one is ever going to feel heartbroken because of me. That is a tall order because how someone feels is not entirely on you. See you, Vera. Thanks for hanging out. Have a good night. And so, from that place, we are now unwilling to feel any guilt. And we might discover, like, oh, that's the reason why. Like, oh, it's because I have a story that saying no to someone means that I am not willing to make time for them. And that means that they're not important. And that's actually my own childhood training. And I'm not willing to inflict that on someone. Now, the important thing, the benefit of this approach is seeing that that's a story you created. Oh my goodness, that's not objectively true. There's a million reasons you could say no to someone, and they can be completely different from that one. And since it's all created and made up, I get to choose. And so this client, this person might be like, oh wow, this is so freeing. It's going to feel great at first. And I'm like, oh, this is amazing. I don't have to feel guilty, and I could create a different story and I could live into that story. It feels like we're getting somewhere. So they might create a new story that like saying no to someone is actually an act of service. I don't know. I'm just making this up. Saying no to someone is an act of really honoring myself, and that's the best way I can honor everyone else. By honoring myself first and foremost, I'm going to create space for everyone else to do so. I'm modeling that. And when I do say yes to people, I'm going to have more of me available to bring to them. Okay, great. That's the new story. Here's the trap. Down this path, you've now created what we would call a new context. So the old belief was your context. Oh, saying no means that you don't have time for people, blah, 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 all of that stuff. Now you've created a new story that you want to live into. You want to make this new story your reality. But the trouble here is that the old story is a story you've been running for 30 years. And the reason you've been running this old story is because it alleviates you from the pain of feeling that guilt. So the reason you've said yes for all these years, the reason you've overscheduled yourself for all of these years, because it means you don't have to feel guilty. And even though the feeling of guilt is a function of the story you've created, it's still, any belief lived out long enough becomes our reality until we change it. And so now what we're trying to do is we're trying to step into a new belief. But as we do that, the old belief still has sway. It's still got power. It's not disappeared immediately. Just because I can see the possibility of new belief doesn't mean the old one vanishes in a puff of smoke. And that's what's happening in this toxic belief on this side, is if I just talk about this enough with a therapist or a coach or a counselor or a friend, then the feeling will vanish. I can think my way sufficiently such that the old belief will stop having any power whatsoever on me. And that does not tend to be the case. And in fact, as you keep talking about it, you'll tend to actually create a lot of reinforcement of the old belief. You give it more power because you talk about how it has so much power, and that lends it more power. And so what the thing that's missing in these two approaches, the transcendent part, is the willingness to like slow down and look at this thing and actually distinguish what's going on under the surface and really sit with it. But then at the same time, there is a point where we're like, okay, there's a new belief I'm going to live into. And we have to, maybe the word is surrender, or come to a willingness to know that even though we're now stepping into a new belief, there is still a degree of having to just fucking do it. Now, who we're being as we just fucking do it is different. We're now just fucking doing it in service of stepping into a new belief rather than operating still within the confines of the old one. But either way, you're going to experience guilt as you're practicing this new belief because it takes time to form it. It takes time to live into it. And while you haven't yet like made it concrete, you showing up different is going to trigger people. You've trained the world around you to relate to you a certain way. And so when you start saying, no, actually, I don't have time for that, people are going to be like, well, they don't care about me. They're going to have whatever reaction they're going to have. And their reaction, they're getting triggered. While we haven't yet created our new belief, will trigger us. And then what happens is that trigger pushes us towards our old belief. Ah, I knew it. Here's proof. Here's proof that I'm selfish and I don't care about people. And instead, the real work is to get supported in those moments. So we can like, oh, that's actually me choosing into the old belief. I'm going to step back over here. I'm going to keep creating this belief. And even though I'm creating a new belief, it doesn't mean anyone else's belief is going to change. And in this new belief, where I'm putting myself first because that allows me to better serve people, maybe it's possible that sometimes people feel heartbroken when I put myself first, but that doesn't mean that I'm selfish. All of that awareness does not change the fact that we will feel guilty at first. And so this is the real challenge in coaching, in any transformational work, is that simultaneously we are working to unfold the existing belief and create a new one to step into. And there is still a point where we have to go and step into our fear. So not just fucking do it and not think and talk about it enough that it vanishes, but actually the combination of both of those, the marriage of those two. So it's in the duality, in the binary nature of these that we get fucked up. It's in marrying them together and being willing to bring the courage forward to take those scary steps when we haven't yet formulated that new belief. That's where everything starts to change. And it sucks because it's scary. So a good coach will work with someone. David, you and I are here a little bit, incidentally, and I'm guessing you probably know this. A good coach will work to the point with someone where, um, there's a point to talk and talk and talk, and then effective coaching is the ability to recognize, like, hey, it's time to act. There is no more. There is no more coaching. What the coaching is, go and do the scary thing. Sheila, there's a story from our work together when we had first started that I remember that I would love to share if you'd be all right with me doing that. So just let me know. It's not, I don't think it's going to be like it's not going to break any substantial uh, confidentiality or anything like that. I just want to make sure that it's okay with you if I share something that we had talked about long, long ago that I think you've probably moved beyond. So if you're still here, let me know if that'd be okay, and I would love to do that. Okay, let me have a sip of tea and see what else we have. Breaking free of the past and bragging versus owning our light. Hmm, cool. I love that, Sheila. I love how cool you are, Sheila. It's one of the things I really love about you is you are very cool. You're a cool cat. So Sheila, and I worked together long, long ago, back when Sheila was training as a coach. Um, I was brought in, I was the only man brought in to an entirely, like a whole room of women. So it was all of Sheila's cohort, which were all women. And then the entire leadership team were all women. And then they were like, we need some masculine energy. Adam, can you come in and bring here? And I think someone had actually quit the team too. So the timing worked out. And so, first of all, I wasn't, I didn't consider the impact that would have being the only man in a room of feminine energy well, it's not all feminine energy, but like of all women. So that was just interesting in its own right. Anyhow, I coached Sheila for the second half of this year. And there was a point where Sheila and I were in a conversation. We'd been talking for a while about her coaching practice. And she was saying, I can't remember exactly what it was, but something to the effect of like, I want to feel confident creating clients. I want to not let my fear stop me. And so we talked about this a bunch, and I said, okay, like for real, do you really want to do this? Hey, Rich. And she said, yeah, I'm really want to do this. I'm like, are you committed to this? Like even, not wanting your fear to stop you. Yes, absolutely. I said, great. I think it wasn't creating clients. It was like reaching out to people or something like that. And I'm like, are you clear on the people that are in the way? Yes. Okay, great. So what's going to happen is we're going to end this call and you're going to go and you're going to call those people. And Sheila got, as I recall, quite nervous about this and was like, well, I can't, it's too soon. Um, and so that was that moment, right? That's where our fear is like one more conversation. Just have one more conversation. And then of course there's always going to be one more conversation. And I can't remember if Sheila took that on. And I think we actually might have finished the conversation. Then she went and did it that week. So it was too edgy to do it right in that moment, but I think she took it on the next week. But that's the part in this work that's edgy for us to hold for someone is their fear wants us to have one more conversation. And instead, often the work is like, no, go and do the thing. If you're really committed to it, it's time. You're ready. Go and take that step. Go and fall on your face. Should this come miles and miles and light years since those early days of our work together. Um, but I love that story. And that is a metaphor for so many of the conversations that I find myself in with people is, well, can we have just one more conversation about this? We could. Do you really want to? Or is it time to actually move yourself forward? Okay. Bragging versus owning your light and breaking free of the past. I'm going to talk about breaking free of the past first. Lindsay says, can we really break free of the trauma of past and not speak our pain into creation, keeping the patterns of the pain going? So how do we, like, first of all, let's define trauma. I'm going to define it. I'm going to define it very broadly. Trauma being, yes, Sheila, I think it was where you got super ticked at me, if I remember correctly. Um, excuse me. I'm going to define trauma as any event that leaves a impact on us that is negative. That's not the way trauma would be defined clinically, and that's okay. We're going to use trauma very broadly here. So, like, if my thought, it's all a gradient, first of all, right? If my dad, when I say, Dad, do you love me? And he's very busy and he turns away, that will create some trauma for me because it's going to land like, oh, my dad doesn't love me under this definition. So Lindsay may be asking for a more specific answer, but I'm going to answer this very broadly. Can we break free of the trauma of the past? All of us came out of our childhood with trauma, no matter how blessed your childhood was. And I speak from a position of having a very blessed childhood. My parents were very loving. They raised me as best they could. They imbued in me like um, a healthy respect for money. There was never a concern that we weren't going to be able to eat or anything like that. But there was also never sort of like, you can do anything, son. You've got all the money. There was nothing like that. And still, I came out of that life fucked up and with addictions and like all of the stuff that I came out of that life with. So all of us experience trauma. That's the reason I'm keeping this so broad is so that we can look at this through the lens of like, oh, thank goodness I'm not one of those people who has trauma in their past. You do under this definition. So then the question becomes, can we break free of it? Can we wipe that slate completely clean? Can I completely escape the trauma, the way that my life happened so as to be blank slate from here? So my opinion is no. My opinion would be no, we cannot do that, in part because the trauma is what made us who we are. So the trauma, as much as like it's unfortunate because we don't have a word for the positive side of trauma in this model that we're kind of talking through. We've got trauma as like, oh, when something happens and it has a negative impact or it creates some kind of hurt. There's another side of it, which is like, imagine if we were to ask the question, can you escape and break free of the love of your past? That'd be weird. We'd be like, why would you want to do that? The love of your past is a positive thing. The trauma is clearly a negative thing. But actually, I would argue neither of these are positive or negative. They might have us veer or take a different direction, but love has the same effect. And both of these are just ways that we relate to the events in our life that bend and shape us going forward. Now, trauma can really twist people, but so too can love. And the risk here is that we get into this conversation that becomes really, it starts to get clinical or go down a path that I think is less useful for the conversation we're currently in right now. What I see is that to some extent, my fears are always going to be my fears. The fear of being stupid is always going to be one of my fears. That's not going to change. Whatever level, like if I found myself in front of Al Gore, who I'm told is very brilliant, and was talking to him, just ran into him at a party, there's probably a part of me that's going to get scared, like, oh, this guy's super smart. He's so brilliant. I hope he thinks I'm brilliant. What if he thinks I'm stupid? Like that part of me is well worn. That part of me has been there since a very young age, in part because who I am is brilliance. And so, of course, I'm going to be afraid of not that. What I think we can do is we can get ever better and better at distinguishing when that fear is showing up, distinguishing when we are reacting to it, and choosing something else. That's the work. Is can I notice when my fear is showing up, and can I recognize it as fear and then choose from a different place other than my reaction to that fear? And as we are able to do that more and more and more, what that allows us is access to more of who we are innately in the presence of more of however life shows up for us in the moment. So the more we do that, the more of life we can just be with. We don't have to mitigate or control or change. Fun to hang with you too, Sheila. Love you as well. Happy holidays. We don't need the world around us or life to show up looking a certain way so that it's acceptable to us. We're just being naturally ourselves. We are in harmony with life as it's showing up rather than disharmony with how life shows up. Now, can we ever break free of the past and be a complete clean slate? I don't think so. I think that's a beautiful way to aspire towards. To me, that would be Buddhahood or the aspiration that is Jesus, Son of God, or however you relate to him, like someone pure, purely love, and who never lets their fear get the better of them. That is a wonderful idea. And it's something I aspire towards, but I also know that I'm a human. And so if there's ever a point where I like fully cleaned out all my edges, I don't think I'm ever really any more human at that point. I think I've left this earthly plane. I think I'm now purely operating on the spiritual level. And I don't, that doesn't jive with my experience of this life. This may change. Maybe I'll reach 60 and be like, huh, yeah, I just sit on this cloud and this is how I am. But I don't find that as empowering as the belief I currently hold, which again is subject to change. But that belief is that like there's always going to be new edges for me to take on. I'm going to keep expanding and playing at new levels and finding new places that call me forward more so than I've been comfortable being called forward yet. And in those places will be an edge for me to step beyond. And so, you can see a lot of that in the commitments I am in my life. Like I'm committed to always working with a coach because there's always going to be work for me to do. Not because I feel I'm broken and just am committed to like, I never am going to achieve a place I can get to on my own where I'm sufficient. This is not a game about sufficiency. It's a game about continual expansion and growth. And so from that place, I choose into commitments that really empower that. So that for me is the answer to this question. Can we really break free of the trauma of the past? I don't think so, but I do think that we can grow ever more at cause for how we show up, regardless of what happened in our past, both traumatic and loving. Okay, last thing we're going to touch on, which is Sarah's question. Sarah writes, what did you write, Sarah? Today I've been looking at the edginess of bragging and appreciation and noticing the difference with gratitude. Your take on that topic would be lush to hear. Sweet, let's get lush, guys. So really what I want to do is distinguish between bragging and owning our light. The definition I have for bragging is going out of my way to draw attention to what I have done or who I am. It would be well, ultimately the difference is underneath in our being. So on the surface, they might look very similar. Like if I simply tell you, oh, who I am for a space is brilliance and connection, you might say, what an arrogant dickhead. I can't believe he would say these things. Who does he think he is? What a jerkhole. And I would say, jerkhole, I like that. Thank you. Whereas if I was bragging, I might, like you might, I don't know, I might say the exact same thing. Well, who I am is brilliance and connection. The difference is the being underneath from which those statements arise. So bragging is often a function of trying to compensate for a fear of what we are not. If I'm afraid that you relate to me as stupid, I'm going to be inclined out of reaction. One of the things I'll be inclined to do out of reaction to that fear is point out all of the ways in which I am not stupid. I will naturally start to share with you stories about how brilliant I am, and these times when this person told me that I had an IQ of 106 million and they've never seen that before, and then they fell to the floor. And as often goes through the case when it's bragging, I'm going to be compelled to exaggerate too, because I'm trying to outrun that underlying fear that I'm stupid. And so, hey, that story about me being smart was great, but what if I added a little bit of juice to it and the person like wet themselves with the size of my IQ and they told me that I should make cars, or I don't know, whatever. Versus if I don't have a need to prove anything about myself, if I am able to trust that who I am simply is brilliance, then the times I'm going to mention that are when I see it might serve the moment, as opposed to when I'm feeling at risk of looking stupid. So even though the doing on the surface can look identical, the words might be exactly the same, one is done as a compensatory reaction to a fear underneath. The other is done because I'm more present to the moment and what would serve that moment. If I'm in a conversation with someone and I notice that they're really brilliant, but they have no ability to relate to themselves that way, they keep telling me, hey, I'm not that smart, I know, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, wow, what would really serve this person is for someone to model for them just owning your intellect. Then I might say, yeah, well, I hear you say that a lot. And I mean, for one, I know who I am for the world is a lot of brilliance. I'm a really smart guy. I can see a lot of order in chaos. I can articulate challenging concepts in ways that people can understand, and I can move between the strategic and the tactical, the high level and the low level. And so there I'm modeling it, I'm owning it, and my experience is that that's who you are too. So it's interesting to me that you're continually playing off that you're not smart, that you're dumb. And so that's an example of where I'm owning my light, not because I'm afraid that you might not see it, but because I believe it would serve the moment. And that's really where bragging and owning our light become different. And so one is done, just to summarize this, one is done out of a need to prove something about ourselves. I feel this need to prove something about myself, whereas the other is done because we see it would serve the moment. Much of what we do is done from a need to prove something about ourselves or prove something not about ourselves, right? So like, oh my God, I'm worried that I'm arrogant. I need to prove that I'm not arrogant. Well, then I'll prove that by boasting inadvertently about all the times I've been generous, all the things I've done for charity. And the irony of bragging is that it gets us the opposite of what we're hoping for. If I brag about my intellect, that leaves people thinking like, what's this guy trying to prove? And why is he being so arrogant? And then that has them turn away from me. And if that's a brilliant person, I really wanted their respect, them turning away furthers my fear that they don't think I'm smart enough. And so then I raise the volume even further and they leave even more and so on and so forth. So it becomes self-perpetuating. That's the way our fear and our reactions to the fear work. Yeah, exactly, Brenda. There's always an edge. Maturity doesn't negate edges. That's how I hold it. The reason I'm saying, maybe I will turn a certain age is because I want to be cautious about holding a particular belief sacred. The truth believed, as Werner Erhard puts it, the truth believed is a lie. And what he means by that is anytime we have a belief that we are like, this is true, this belief is not a belief I've created, this is reality, now we're in trouble because that means that's a sacred cow. And there might be a point where there's something that calls for a greater belief, but because we've decided this is the truth, we're now locked into it. We've limited our ability to grow to whatever's next. So I'm with you. Like that's how I hold it too currently. And what I'm really speaking into the space here is my commitment that I'm willing to release that belief if at some point life shows me something different or calls forward from me something different. Okay, well, it looks like we've had most people kind of drop off, so that feels like a pretty good place for us to finish up. What are the things I'm going to plug? I'm going to plug some stuff. First, I'm going to plug Christmas. And the way I'm going to plug Christmas is saying it's rad. And lots of people have this context about Christmas that it's all commercialized and it's a bunch of bullshit and fuck Christmas. And that's fine. That's a totally fine belief to have. You don't have to buy into the commercialism. What if all that this holiday was about was finding our way back to love and finding our way to our families? That would be a nice thing to celebrate. So we don't have to be at the effect of what capitalism is doing. Just because capitalism makes it very commercial doesn't mean you have to. And it doesn't mean you have to reject it outright just because these other people are trying to do a thing with it that we don't agree with. So, big plug for Christmas. I'm really excited to spend some time at home. I love the season of year. I'm excited to spend a bit of time with the depth and grief that is the season of winter and just be with that energy. And I hope you are too. I hope that all of you are doing something cool, something nourishing for yourselves and for your family. Um, I'm going to plug two books I just got in the mail by Derek Sivers. Hell Yeah or No and Your Music and Your People. Your Music and People. I've not read these yet. I follow Derek Sivers. He created the program CD Baby in the early days of the internet because he had a bunch of musician friends that were like, it's friggin' impossible to sell my own music. There was no iTunes or anything at this point. And so Derek found that too, and he was like, well, I'm going to create a website to sell my music online. And then people were like, can you do that for me? And then over time, he just started responding to that and ended up with this multi-million-dollar company selling people's music online before we had systems to do so. And so Derek's a guy with a great deal of wisdom. He's quite funny and really delightful. And one thing that's cool about him is he sends emails out on his newsletter once in a while, maybe once a month or so. And he says, hey, these are the new blog posts I've written. I think you might enjoy them. And he responds to every email you send him. So I'll just send him a message saying like, hey dude, nice to hear from you. Hope you're doing well. And it's never a long correspondence, but he's a really neat guy. And he's just released, I think, 3 books, but I only got 2 of them. So if you're interested in his work or want to learn more about him, these books are available. I've not read them yet. And yeah, so check them out. Derek Sivers, Sivers. The Creating Clients course, you got 2 more weeks before we start, and I think we have 8 people there currently. So that's a really like the reason I am going to invite you to join that course right now is if you want to go deeper with me. So what we're going to teach you is the art of enrollment, ultimately. Like how do we enroll? How do we bring people along with us in order to create whatever we want to create? In the business context, the heart of enrollment or the way we relate to enrollment is what we call sales, but it's not really about sales. This is a leadership and a life skill. How do I bring people along with me? And that's what we're teaching. But really, the reason I would invite you to this course is if you're like, man, I want to go further with Adam. I want to do a bit of deeper work with them. This is a great place to start doing that. It's very low cost to entry. It's $1,000 US, and it runs from January, February, and March. It's 10 weeks. It'll be awesome. It's going to be transformational. We have a really cool group of people in there this time. I'm really excited. So too is the last group of people. Um, Anything else? Hmm, no, I don't see anything else. Oh, I'll plug curtains. Put curtains in front of your window. It diffuses the light and it makes it very lovely. Okay, love you guys. I won't be live next Friday because it's going to be Christmas, but I will be live the following one. Have a great holiday. See y'all soon. Bye bye.